She paid pennies for a shackled pup 3 moons later, the Alpha King. The wind carried a bitter chill across the small village of Thalden, rustling the dry leaves that clung stubbornly to the twisted branches of the Forest of Whispers. The villagers moved quickly through the misted streets, heads bowed, as if the fog itself carried secrets meant to be feared. Ilaria, however, walked slowly, her bare fingers brushing against the worn fabric of her cloak. Her eyes, a pale green that seemed almost too bright for the gray world around her, scanned the marketplace. She had little money, only a handful of coins pressed into her palm by a mother long gone, but she had a determination that was fiercer than hunger or cold. The day's task was simple: trade what she had for something she could care for, something alive, something that would not ask for explanations or question her worth. The merchant stood at the edge of the market, half hidden beneath a tattered canvas. His face was obscured by shadow, but his eyes gleamed like polished coal. Around him, cages rattled and small crates trembled, holding creatures that squirmed and whimpered. And in one darkened cage, shackled by heavy iron chains, was a small wolf pup. Its fur was matted, a dull gray tinged with the color of ash. Its golden eyes watched her with a stillness that made her chest tighten. "It's only a pup," the merchant said, his voice like gravel, "not for the faint of heart. He bites, he scratches, he brings misfortune to those who pity him." Ilaria's fingers tightened around her coins. "I don't want him for pity," she said softly, her voice almost swallowed by the fog. "I want him because he's alone." The pup's ears twitched, and he let out a low whine, the sound like a small wind through hollow reeds. The merchant's lips curled into a thin smile. "Alone, yes, and so are you. Perhaps that is why he looks at you this way." Ilaria knelt before the cage. The pup's golden eyes followed her every movement. She reached a trembling hand through the bars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, the pup pressed its small head against her palm. A shiver ran up her arm, as though the touch carried a secret she could not yet name. "I'll take him," she said. The words left her lips before fear could stop them. The merchant's hand closed around the coins, and he stepped back, letting her carry the cage without another word. The journey home was quiet. The village behind her grew smaller, swallowed by mist and shadow, and the forest ahead loomed like a wall of dark velvet. Ilaria carried the cage close, feeling the pup's warmth against her chest. It was not an ordinary warmth, not like a normal animal. There was a heartbeat there, strong and uneven, that seemed almost human in its insistence. When she arrived at her small home, a shack perched precariously on the edge of the forest, she set the cage down gently. She watched the pup as he circled, sniffing the ground and the walls, finally curling up in a corner. His gaze never left hers, even as he closed his eyes to rest. Days passed. Ilaria fed him scraps of bread and milk, watched him grow stronger under her care. And each night, when the fog crept closer and shadows danced against the walls, she would hear soft noises, a whine, a scrape, a whisper in the dark, and the pup would be waiting, his golden eyes bright in the gloom. It was during one of these nights that she first dreamed of the figure. He was tall, taller than any man she had seen, with hair black as the forest shadows and eyes that burned silver in the moonlight. He did not speak, but his gaze met hers with a weight that left her breathless. In the dream, he reached toward her, hand trembling, and she reached back, feeling a warmth that was not of the world she knew. When she woke, the pup was at the foot of her bed, shaking slightly. She touched his head, and he pressed into her hand with a force that made her heart ache. It was as if he carried the memory of the dream within him, a memory she could not yet understand. Weeks passed. The bond between Ilaria and the pup grew, unspoken but undeniable. She named him Ash, for the color of his fur and the traces of fire she sensed beneath his calm surface. The villagers began to whisper. They saw her wandering near the forest's edge, Ash trotting silently at her heels, and they muttered about curses and omens. Ilaria ignored them. She had never belonged to their world anyway. One evening, under the glow of a red moon, something changed. Ilaria was sitting outside, brushing Ash's fur when the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind dropped. The shadows deepened. Ash stiffened, hackles raised, ears pricked forward. Before her eyes, the pup began to grow. His body stretched and lengthened, his fur shifting in color from gray to a deep, shimmering black. His paws lengthened into hands, claws retracting. And then standing where the pup had been was a man. Tall, powerful, and yet wounded in a way that made Ilaria's chest tighten. His silver eyes, so like Ash's golden ones, studied her, and for a moment neither moved. "You," she whispered, but the words caught in her throat. "I am not what you think," he said, his voice low, resonant, and edged with pain. "I am bound by chains you cannot see, by a curse older than your village, older than the forests." Ilaria's mind raced. She wanted to step back, but her body would not obey. Fear and wonder tangled within her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Kale," he said. "Once a king, now a shadow in my own story. I am bound to this form until someone chooses me freely, not out of fear, not out of pity." Ilaria's eyes widened. "Then why did you come to me? Why were you in the forest?" Kale's gaze softened, though it carried the weight of centuries. "Because you saw me as I am, not a monster, not a ghost, but someone who longs for freedom. You paid pennies for a shackled pup, yet your heart offered more than gold could ever buy." The wind stirred around them, carrying whispers of long-forgotten voices. Ash, or rather Kale, stepped closer, the ground seeming to respond to him, vibrating softly as though the forest itself recognized his presence. Ilaria took a shaky breath. I don't know if I can help you," she admitted. "I'm just a girl with nothing." "You have more than you realize," Kale said, "and sometimes that is enough." They were silent for a long moment, watching the red moon hang heavy above the forest. Then, without warning, Kale sank to his knees, his head lowering in exhaustion. The transformation had taken something from him, or perhaps the world had shifted to reveal what had always been there. Ilaria knelt beside him, hesitating only for a heartbeat before reaching out. Her fingers brushed against his silver hair, and she felt the pulse beneath his skin, strong, steady, but carrying the weight of endless years. "I don't know what to do," she said again, softer this time, almost a whisper. "Then do nothing," Kale replied. "Only be here. Only see me. That is the beginning." Night deepened. The forest around them was alive with shadow and murmurs, but within the circle of the shack, a fragile bond had formed. Ilaria understood, somehow, that she had stepped into a story far larger than herself. A story of kings and curses, of loss and longing, of freedom earned not by sword or coin, but by the quiet bravery of the heart. And yet, even as she felt the stirrings of hope, a chill pressed against her spine. The shadows in the forest moved differently now, watching. Whispers had grown louder, as though the world itself had noticed the presence of Kale once more. Ilaria shivered, pulling her cloak tighter. "We're not alone," she murmured. Kale's eyes, silver in the moonlight, met hers. "No, the world remembers me even when I am hidden. And it does not forgive easily." For the first time, Ilaria felt fear not just for herself, but for the man who had once been a king, now kneeling before her like a wounded animal. Yet beneath that fear was something else, a fierce, stubborn hope that she could be more than a bystander. She could be a part of his story, and maybe, in doing so, heal the pieces of herself she had long ignored. The wind howled through the trees. The red moon burned above. And in the quiet of the shack, a girl and a king, one of flesh, one of shadow, began a journey neither fully understood. They would face whispers, curses, and the weight of old betrayals. But for tonight, they only watched the moon, hearts beating in the same rhythm, connected by chains that were not iron but trust. And as the forest breathed around them, Ilaria realized that some stories begin with pennies, some with chains, and some with the choice to see the truth in a creature who is more than he seems. The forest was quiet in the hours before dawn, but the silence was heavy, like a held breath. Ilaria and Kale had spent the night in her small shack. The red moon now faded, leaving only a silver light in its wake. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, a scent both calming and sharp, reminding her that the world outside their fragile shelter was still wild, still dangerous. Kale sat near the hearth, his tall frame hunched, hands resting on knees that seemed too long for the small room. He looked like a man who had carried centuries in his shoulders, every line in his face a memory of betrayal, loss, and a power that had once ruled kingdoms. Ilaria studied him in silence. There was more to him than the silver eyes and the wolfish grace. There was a history she could feel pressing down, even if she could not yet name it. "You move like a shadow," she said softly, trying to break the silence. "Even as a wolf, you were careful, controlled. Everything you do now has that same weight." Kale's eyes flicked to hers, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "A shadow remembers everything," he said, "even when it is chained." Ilaria frowned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Chained? You mean not just the wolf form?" He shook his head slowly. "I am bound by more than these chains of iron or flesh. A curse holds me. A crown that should have been mine, stolen by betrayal, left me to wander in darkness. The wolf was a punishment, but it is also a prison of the heart. I cannot trust, not fully, not again." Ilaria swallowed hard. She had never met someone who carried their pain so openly, yet so silently. Every word he spoke was a thread, winding around her heart and pulling. She wanted to reach out, to touch the wounds she could not see, to help him carry the burden he had worn for so long. "You were a king once," she said carefully, "and now you're here in this shack with me." "Yes," Kale said, voice low, "and you've done what no one else could. You've seen me not as a monster, not as a shadow, but as I am. That is dangerous. Dangerous for you and for me." Ilaria's fingers itched to brush his hair again, to feel the warmth beneath his skin, but fear held her back. She had always been careful, always measured. Yet something in Kale demanded recklessness, demanded trust. "I don't care about dangerous," she whispered. "I only care that you exist, that you are here. I won't turn away from you." Kale's eyes softened, but a shadow passed over them. "Careful, Ilaria. You cannot fight the world alone, and you cannot fight the darkness within me." She nodded, silently accepting the warning, even as her heart thumped in her chest. There was no turning back. Whatever Kale was, he had chosen to trust her, even for a moment, and that choice had sealed her own. The next day, they left the shack. Kale's movements were precise, his senses attuned to the forest in a way that made Ilaria's skin prickle. Every step, every turn, every shadow seemed to whisper a warning, yet they moved forward, deeper into the territory he had once ruled. "The forest remembers me," Kale said, his voice low as they walked beneath the canopy of twisted branches. "Even in exile it speaks to me. Some remember kindness, some remember cruelty, and some are waiting for me to fall again." Ilaria glanced at him. "Are you afraid?" Kale did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the path ahead, sharp and unflinching. "Yes, but fear is not weakness. Fear is memory. It reminds you what is at stake." They came upon the ruins of Kale's castle by midday. Vines climbed the walls like fingers, windows gaped like empty eyes, and the throne room, once grand, lay open to the sky, its stones cracked and blackened. Yet in the decay there was power. There was history. The air thrummed with the echoes of battles and whispers of ghosts that would not rest. Kale stepped forward, his hand brushing the cold stone, and Ilaria felt a pulse under her fingers, a heartbeat not his, but of the castle itself. "This was my home," he said quietly, "and it remembers me, but it also remembers betrayal, treachery, and the cost of pride." Ilaria followed him inside, feeling the weight of history pressing down. She wanted to ask questions, to demand stories, but the air felt sacred, charged with truths she might not be ready to hear. Kale's voice broke the silence. "I did not always rule wisely. I was proud, stubborn, and I hurt those I loved most. My advisors, my family, even the people I swore to protect, I failed them all, and for that I am chained. I was taken from my throne, my form cursed. I became less than a man, yet more than a wolf, and I waited, waiting for someone to see me beyond that form. Illyria's chest ached. The pain in his words, the weight of centuries, made her feel small and yet strangely strong. "You're not just a shadow," she said. "You're still Kale, and now I see you." Kale looked at her, and for a moment the walls of the ruined castle seemed to hold their breath. "Seeing me is dangerous," he said again. "You may not survive the truths you uncover." "I will," she whispered. "I can." They spent hours walking through the castle, Kale showing her the remnants of the throne room, the hidden chambers, and the old armory where weapons still lay in rusted heaps. Illyria listened as he spoke, fragments of a story that spanned lifetimes, battles won and lost, betrayals that cut deeper than any blade. And yet, even as he spoke, there were silences, long, heavy pauses where Kale's gaze would drift to the shadows in the corners, as though he could see threats lurking where she could not. At dusk, they stood on the balcony overlooking the forest. The sky was a muted red, the first hints of moonlight glimmering through clouds. Kale's posture was rigid, a king returning to a ruined throne, yet vulnerable in ways Illyria could not name. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked quietly. "The forest, the ruins, it knows I am back, and it does not forgive lightly," Illyria nodded. "Yes, but you are not alone now, you have me." Kale's lips curved faintly. "That is what makes this so dangerous. My past is not done with me, Illyria. And it will not rest until I either reclaim what was stolen, or it destroys everything I care for." Night fell, bringing shadows that seemed almost alive. Illyria built a small fire in the hearth, its light flickering across Kale's face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the silver glow of his eyes. She could feel the tension in the air, a quiet battle between trust and fear, between longing and caution. Kale approached the fire, kneeling near it, hands close but not touching. "I was not made to trust," he said. "I do not know how to forgive even myself. And yet, I feel something with you that I have not felt in centuries, a glimmer, perhaps even hope." Illyria reached out slowly, her hand brushing his. The touch was electric, a bridge across the centuries of pain he carried. "Then we will learn together," she said softly. "If there is hope, we will find it." For a moment, the world outside the ruined castle disappeared. The forest, the whispers, the shadows, all faded into the distance, leaving only the fragile bond between a girl and a king reborn from the chains of his curse. But the night was not silent for long. A rustling came from the trees beyond the balcony, subtle at first, then sharper, more deliberate. Kale stiffened, his eyes narrowing, ears attuned to every sound. "They come," he murmured. "The ones who remember the old betrayals. They sense my return. And they will not wait patiently." Illyria's heart pounded. "Who are they?" "Those I once called allies," Kale said grimly. "Cursed warriors bound by the same darkness that claimed me. They are drawn to my power, to the alpha within me. If they find us, they will test both our strength and our bond." Illyria took a deep breath, gripping his hand tightly. "Then we face them together." Kale looked at her, a mix of awe and concern in his silver eyes. "Yes, together. But know this, Illyria, the danger is only beginning. The chains I carry are not just mine. They will touch you, shape you, test you. And yet, perhaps that is what will set us both free." The first howls broke the stillness of the forest, distant but unmistakable. Shadows stirred, moving toward the castle like silent hunters. Kale rose, tall and imposing, his wolfish instincts awakening as his human mind prepared for strategy. Illyria followed, heart racing, fear and determination intertwined. She realized fully that the man who had been a shackled pup was no longer just a mystery or a companion. He was a king returning to claim his destiny, and she was part of it, whether she was ready or not. The wind carried the scent of iron and earth, the whisper of the approaching danger. Ilaria's hand brushed Kale's arm, grounding herself in his presence. "We're ready," she said, more to herself than to him. Kale's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, then hardened with resolve. "Yes, but the world will test us. And so will I." As the first shadows of the cursed army reached the tree line, the ruins seemed to come alive, walls vibrating with Kale's presence, as if the castle itself remembered the king it had once housed. Ilaria felt the pulse of history, the tension of the past, and the raw weight of the unknown pressing down. And for the first time, she understood that freedom, trust, and love were battles in their own right, battles that demanded courage greater than any sword could wield. The first light of dawn barely pierced the thick fog that curled through the ruined castle of Kale's old kingdom. The forest outside trembled with an unnatural silence, a quiet that carried the weight of eyes that watched, waited, and whispered. Ilaria stood near the shattered balcony, her fingers gripping the stone railing, heart pounding like a drum in the still air. Kale's presence beside her was solid, unyielding, yet she could feel the tension radiating from him, sharp and alive. "They are close," Kale said, his voice low, almost a growl. His silver eyes scanned the tree line, every shadow and movement noted. "The cursed warriors will test us, not just our strength, but our resolve, and the forest itself may rise against us." Ilaria nodded, swallowing her fear. She had felt the pulse of the castle, the whispers of its walls, the memory of a king bound in shadow. But now, standing at the edge of what remained of his throne, she realized she was part of something larger than herself. The bond with Kale, fragile, terrifying, and yet unbreakable, gave her courage. "Then we fight together," she said. Kale's gaze softened, and for a brief moment she saw the boy he had once been, the boy hidden beneath the weight of centuries. "Yes, together," he agreed. Then his eyes narrowed, sharp and commanding. "But you must listen carefully. There is more than physical danger here. The shadows, they respond to our fear, our hesitation, our doubts. If you falter, even for a moment, they will strike with the memory of your weaknesses." Ilaria inhaled, letting his words settle in her chest. "I won't falter," she whispered. "Not with you." He studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then we begin." The forest trembled as the first figures emerged, faint, distant silhouettes at first, then closer, more defined. They were warriors bound in darkness, their forms wreathed in smoke and shadow, eyes glowing like embers. They carried no weapons, yet every movement was precise, lethal, as if their bodies remembered battles fought centuries ago. Kale moved forward, hands lifted, the air around him shimmering with a subtle energy she had not noticed before. It was not just strength he wielded, it was command, presence, the memory of a king. "Stay behind me," he warned, "and trust what you feel, not what you see. The shadows are clever, but they are not alive. Only you, only we together, can bend this darkness." Ilaria stepped closer, holding her hands tight. She could feel something awakening inside her, a warmth, a current of energy she could not yet name, pulsing in rhythm with Kale's presence. It was as if his power resonated with hers, an invisible tether linking them across fear and uncertainty. The first of the cursed warriors lunged. They moved as one, silent and fluid, and Kale's reaction was instantaneous. He struck, his movements a blur, his fists meeting shadows that solidified and dissolved in unnatural ways. Ilaria watched in awe and fear, noticing the small flickers of energy radiating from him, the subtle vibrations in the stones beneath their feet. "Focus," Kale shouted. "Do not let fear control you." Ilaria closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the rhythm of the forest, the pulse of the castle, the heartbeat of the man beside her. She reached out with her mind, the warmth she had sensed growing stronger, and instinctively a small wave of light pushed at the nearest shadow. The figure staggered, uncertain, its form flickering. Kale's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and approval. You feel it, he said, his voice steady. Good, trust that, trust yourself. They feed on doubt. Your courage can push them back. The battle continued, fierce and chaotic. Shadows twisted and lunged, yet Kale and Ilaria moved as one, a silent rhythm of action and reaction. Every strike, every push of energy, every movement was a conversation between them, wordless, yet full of meaning. The bond between them, forged in quiet trust and shared danger, was growing stronger, more essential than the air around them. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time seemed to bend in the presence of such intensity. And then, in a sudden moment, Ilaria felt it, a darkness within herself, long dormant, stirring. It was deeper than fear, heavier than doubt. A shadow that had lain in her blood for generations, awakening as if called by Kale's presence and the fight against the cursed warriors. She stumbled, clutching her head, and the nearest shadow seized the moment to strike. Kale reacted instantly, pushing her out of the way with a strength that seemed beyond human. Ilaria, he shouted, eyes wide with concern. I don't know what it is, she gasped, trembling. Something inside me. Kale crouched beside her, silver eyes scanning her face. It's your power, he said, voice firm. It has always been there, hidden. The forest, the curse, they awakened it. You must learn to control it or it will control you. Ilaria's chest tightened. Control it, I barely understand it. Kale's gaze softened, though the shadows pressed closer. Then start with instinct. Trust the connection between us. You are not alone in this. The cursed warriors regrouped, more numerous now, their forms shifting and flickering like smoke in the wind. Kale rose, his presence commanding, his silver eyes glowing faintly. We will need more than instinct, he murmured. We will need trust, complete trust. Ilaria nodded, drawing a shaky breath. She focused on him, on the bond they shared, and let the energy within her respond. A wave of warmth and light radiated from her, brushing the shadows back, making them falter. Kale seized the moment, striking with precision, his fists and feet moving in rhythm with the pulses of her energy. Together they became a force neither fully human nor fully shadow, bending the darkness with the strength of their unity. Hours turned into an endless dance, shadow against light, fear against courage, doubt against trust. Ilaria felt herself changing, the warmth in her chest spreading, filling her with a clarity and strength she had never known. Kale watched her, teaching silently, guiding, and yet allowing her to find her own rhythm. By the time the last of the cursed warriors fell, collapsing into shadow that dissipated into mist, both were panting, sweat and ash clinging to their skin. Ilaria felt lightheaded, yet alive in a way she had never known. She looked at Kale, seeing not just the Alpha King reborn, but a man who had survived centuries of betrayal and sorrow, now standing with her as equal in purpose and strength. You, Kale said, voice low, you are stronger than you know. This is only the beginning, Ilaria. And yet it may be enough to save us. Ilaria touched his arm, still trembling from the battle and the awakening of her own power. We saved each other, she said softly. Kale's eyes softened, and for a moment centuries of pain seemed to melt away. Perhaps. But the world is not done testing us. You felt the shadow within yourself, did you not? She nodded, remembering the dark stirrings in her chest, the fear that had tried to overwhelm her. Yes, but I think I can control it now. Kale's silver eyes held hers, steady and unwavering. Control comes with patience and courage, and sometimes surrender. You cannot fight everything alone, Ilaria. Even your power has limits. She hesitated, then nodded. Then I will trust you. For the first time, Kale allowed a small smile, a glimmer of hope breaking through the shadow of his past. And I will trust you. That is the beginning of what may save us both. They sat together on the cold stone of the ruined balcony, the fog creeping around them like a living thing. Ilaria could feel her heartbeat slow, the rhythm of her energy settling, a quiet harmony forming between them. They did not speak much, only shared the warmth of presence, the reassurance that they had survived, that they were growing stronger together. But even as dawn broke fully over the forest, painting the mist in gold and silver light, there was a sense of watching, waiting. The shadows had been pushed back but not destroyed. Somewhere deeper in the forest a presence stirred, ancient and patient, biding its time. Kale stood, his tall figure outlined against the rising sun. "The battle has been won," he said, "but the war is not over. And I fear what is awakening may not be as simple as cursed warriors or old betrayal." Ilaria rose beside him, feeling the surge of her power and the steadying presence of Kale. "Then we face it together," she said firmly. Kale's eyes softened and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, together." The wind carried the scent of earth and shadow, the whispers of the forest, and something older, darker, and more powerful than either of them had faced. And as they stood there, bound by trust, courage, and an unspoken bond, both knew that the true test of their strength and of their hearts had only just begun. The forest of Thalden was alive with an uneasy hum, the mist curling and twisting like a living thing. The ruins of Kale's castle, once silent and mournful, now thrummed with energy, vibrating as though the walls themselves remembered the pulse of kings and shadows. Ilaria stood at the balcony's edge, her fingers brushing the cold stone, her mind a mixture of determination and fear. Beside her, Kale's tall form was a sentinel radiating strength tempered by centuries of pain. "They are coming," Kale said, his voice low, almost a growl. His silver eyes scanned the misty forest, every movement noted. "Not just the cursed warriors this time, something older has awakened, something that has waited for centuries to challenge me, to challenge us." Ilaria nodded, her heart pounding in rhythm with his warning. She could feel her power pulsing beneath her skin, a warm, steady current that now moved with purpose. "Then we face it," she said. "Together." Kale turned to her, the weight of his long years visible in the lines of his face. "Together," he echoed. And for a moment, centuries of sorrow and isolation seemed to fall away, leaving only the bond between them, fragile, fiery, unbroken. From the depths of the forest, shadows began to rise, swirling like smoke in the early morning light. But this time, they moved differently, heavier, more deliberate, and carrying a presence older than the cursed warriors they had fought before. The ground beneath the ruins shivered as if the earth itself feared what was coming. Kale stepped forward, hands raised, his silver eyes blazing. The air around him shimmered, subtle currents of energy forming, bending the mist as though the forest recognized its king. "Ilaria," he said, voice steady, "you must trust your power completely. Do not hesitate. Do not fear it. Let it flow through you, as if it were part of your very blood, because it is." Ilaria took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a heartbeat. She reached inward, feeling the warmth, the current of energy that had awakened within her during their last battle. It was stronger now, clearer, guided by the trust she had placed in Kale and the bond they shared. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his, and let the energy bloom outward, a steady light that pushed back the approaching shadows. The first wave of dark figures collided with the light, faltering, twisting, and retreating as if confused by its purity. Kale struck with precision, fists and feet moving in rhythm with the pulse of her power. Together, they were more than human. Together, they were a force that bent shadows, a harmony of strength and light. But even as they fought, the presence from the forest revealed itself. A towering figure wreathed in darkness, its form shifting and flowing, eyes glowing with ancient intent. It stepped forward and the earth trembled beneath its weight. Ilaria felt her power falter for a brief moment, a shiver of fear creeping into her chest. Kale's hand found hers. "Do not let it frighten you," he said, voice firm. "This is not just a battle of strength. It is a battle of trust. Trust in me, trust in yourself, trust in what we have built together." She squeezed his hand, drawing courage from his presence. "I trust you," she whispered. The shadow roared, a sound that rattled the ruins and shook the trees. Kale moved to confront it, and Ilaria stepped forward beside him, letting the power within her surge, flowing into a shield of light and energy that met the darkness head-on. The figure recoiled, uncertainty flashing in its glowing eyes. Kale struck with force, the ground trembling beneath his movements, and the shadows around it began to break apart. But the battle was not easy. The ancient presence moved with a cunning and intelligence that mirrored Kale's own. Every strike, every push of energy, every movement was met with resistance. The forest seemed to pulse in rhythm with the conflict, the mist swirling around them like living tendrils, whispering secrets and warnings. Ilaria felt fatigue creeping in, her power straining against the ancient shadow. Doubt tried to take hold, the fear that she was not strong enough, that she could not protect Kale or herself. But then she felt his hand on hers again, steadying, grounding, a reminder that they were not alone. "You can do this," Kale said softly. "We can do this, together." She nodded, letting the fear fall away. She focused on the bond between them, the trust that had grown through battles and nights of quiet understanding. And with a deep breath, she let the full strength of her power flow, a radiant energy that danced and twisted like sunlight through mist. The shadow shrieked, recoiling from the brightness, its form breaking and reforming, trying to resist the force of their unity. Kale struck again, moving with fluid precision, striking not just with fists but with command, bending the darkness as though it were clay. Ilaria followed his lead, her energy weaving with his, a symphony of light and strength. For a moment it seemed endless, a dance of shadows and light, fear and courage, doubt and trust. But then Kale's silver eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Now, Ilaria," he said. "Surrender to the bond. Let us end this together." Ilaria let go of hesitation, letting the power and trust within her flow completely. Their energies met, combining into a single force, a radiant pulse that surged outward, pushing the shadow back, forcing it to confront the truth of its own weakness. The ancient figure wavered, then collapsed, dissolving into mist that vanished into the forest. The ruins were silent again, the mist curling lazily in the morning light. Kale and Ilaria stood side by side, breathing heavily, their hands still joined, their eyes locked. The weight of centuries, the chains of curse and betrayal had been lifted not by strength alone but by trust, unity, and courage. Kale turned to Ilaria, a rare softness in his silver gaze. "You were remarkable," he said quietly, "stronger than I ever imagined." Ilaria smiled, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We were remarkable together." He studied her, the hint of a smile on his lips. "I have carried the weight of kings and curses for centuries. I never imagined I would find someone who could stand with me, not just beside me but as an equal, and yet here you are." Ilaria's heart fluttered. "You've carried too much for too long," she said. "It's time to share the weight. We can carry it together." Kale's hand brushed her cheek, a gesture both tender and commanding. "Then we will," he said softly. "Together we will reclaim what was lost not for the past but for the future." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of the forest and the ruins. For the first time in centuries, Kale felt something he had not allowed himself to feel: hope. And alongside it, a quieter, deeper realization that redemption was not given by time or by breaking curses alone, but by connection, trust, and the courage to embrace one another despite fear and pain. Ilaria's gaze met his, unwavering. "Then let's rebuild," she said. "Not just the castle but the kingdom and ourselves." Kale nodded, a glimmer of a smile breaking through the shadow of his past. "Yes, and perhaps in doing so we find more than crowns or power, we find peace." For hours they stood together on the balcony, watching the forest awaken under the morning sun. Birds sang again, a gentle reminder that life moved forward, even after centuries of sorrow and shadow. The ruins no longer felt haunted. They felt alive, filled with possibility, strengthened by trust and courage. As they walked through the castle, restoring what they could, Ilaria felt her own power integrating more smoothly. no longer a force to fear, but a tool to protect and create. Kale guided her, but he also allowed her space to grow, to learn, to become the partner she was destined to be. Evenings were spent in quiet conversation, laughter echoing softly through the halls. Kale shared fragments of his past, not just the betrayals and curses, but the moments of joy, of loyalty, and of love that had been buried beneath centuries of pain. Ilaria shared her own story, her fears and hopes, the simple courage that had led her to buy a shackled pup with the last of her coins. Each story built bridges, each shared moment healing wounds that had once seemed insurmountable. The bond between them was no longer fragile or uncertain. It was steadfast, tempered by trials, strengthened by trust, and deepened by shared victories and courage. They had faced darkness, not just in the shadows outside but in themselves, and emerged stronger together. And yet, as they stood at the balcony one last time, watching the sun set in gold and crimson, Ilaria knew the story was far from over. The world would still test them, still challenge them with shadows and whispers. But now they faced it together not as king and subject, nor as girl and cursed pup, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and something deeper than either had ever known. Kale took her hand, holding it gently but firmly. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it as one. Not alone, not in fear, together." Ilaria nodded, her heart full. Together. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and promise. The castle stood tall in the forest, a symbol of redemption and hope, its walls no longer haunted by the past, but alive with the possibility of the future. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Kale and Ilaria stood together, bound by love, trust, and the courage to reclaim not just a kingdom but themselves. The chains had been broken, the shadow had passed, and the Alpha King had finally found his queen, and his heart had finally found its home.